First, I would like to congratulate the organizers for picking up such a very timely topic, and I will explain in my presentation why this is a timely topic. I'm also grateful to the Asia Society, which always had trade policy on its radar, and I have to say I do not have good words for my university, which does not really have these things on the radar, so you really hear a kind of vanguard here. And both academic research but also our government in Bern is not very fast dealing with these really challenging topics. And that's actually already my first answer, how Asian it is. How Asian is RCEP? It is Asian because in Asia globalization has never stopped. They did not deal with domestic or local or regional problems as we did in the West. There was no progress in the transatlantic arena. There was not much progress in the European Union. We had to deal with a crisis, and we were actually glad when we could keep up existing economic integration levels while Asia is going on. So this process we have been observing for quite a time, but every time we have a new crisis, this is kind of fastening. So especially for the next generation, and I guess many of you will live in this world that is going to take shape now. So these are the decisions, these are the institutions that will shape the economic world, the trade integration world of tomorrow. And that's my motivation why I'm here, because that's what we have to discuss here right now. How Asian is it? It has a regional perspective, but the process is actually much older, and that's how I started to analyze this process. It was in the early 2000s when I noticed that the trade integration level of East Asia, and with East Asia I mean the north of the region, Japan, China, South Korea, and also the south of the region, the ASEAN countries, that trade integration level was already high without a network of bilateral free trade agreements and without regional institutions. So after the European Union, this region had the highest trade integration level in the world without having institutions or bilateral agreements. So this was the challenging question for me, how is it possible? Because here in the West, we tend to overestimate the significance of legal agreements and formal institutions. So in Asia, we have an integration process driven by economic pragmatism, by step-by-step opening, which was very successful if you look at the level of trade integration and also look at the level of border crossing value chains. The next step then was the building up of a network of bilateral free trade agreements. The interesting thing is it was based mainly on ASEAN, the so-called ASEAN Plus agreements. And now with RCEP we have a new level of formalizing and kind of ambitious economic agreement. The interesting thing is that we have to discuss this in the context of two agreements. So there's RCEP on the one side, and there is CPTPP, as it's called now, on the other side. And we have the interesting situation that RCEP integrates East Asia to really a new level compared to before. And CPTPP fragments East Asia because only selected member states are member of these initiatives. So here you see in light blue the RCEP only members, and in the dark blue the RCEP and the TPP 11 members. So this is a competitive process. And that's not surprising if you study trade policy, because all these processes have a competitive dimension. So who is member, who goes first, who integrates faster, this can be decisive. So that's different from economic textbooks. It's a political process also, and Switzerland has learned to live in this world of competitive trade arrangements. Now, what's new in RCEP? Very brief. I think the ASEAN statements had made it very clear because, as I said, there was a network of ASEAN Plus arrangements already in place, and most of the countries involved in RCEP already had free trade relations. So they already had started the process of dismantling tariffs, so that's not the big thing. So this is not the big bang of starting trade liberalization, but it's the big bang is the single rule book. That's the most important aspect. And that's extremely good news for companies, for Asian companies, but also for European, including Swiss companies, because you can follow a single rule book that makes things much easier. You can reorganize your value chain much easier now under this single rule book. What's really new is only that these two cases of newly established free trade relations, as I have mentioned it, all other relations were based on FTAs already. So this is really new for the China-Japan relationship and for the Japan-South Korea relationship. That's the really big news, and that's where I expect also the biggest impact. So no big bang if you look at the big picture, but a formalization of an already existing and ongoing process. And of course, this creates legal security for actors involved. That's a very important aspect. And yeah, it's a great thing. It will take some time. I have studied the tariff abolition schedules. In most cases, this is 10 years. And this is also the most important aspect for Swiss companies. If we look at it from a Swiss perspective, the mega regionals in East Asia look like this. So we have the countries that Switzerland is connected through free trade agreements through EFTA. That's on the right side. You see that here, Singapore, and the latest, of course, Indonesia. Then we have bilateral agreements with the People's Republic of China and with Japan, and ongoing negotiations with other ASEAN members. So if you look at this, at the first impression probably is Switzerland has a good position. And indeed, it has a good position. I have to say Switzerland is really a speedboat in FTA negotiations, clearly faster than the European Union, for example. So we could say, okay, why do we care? We have, with most of these countries, we already have free trade agreements. With others, we are going to have soon. Unfortunately, this would be the wrong message. The trade policy world is integrating very fast, and this network of bilateral free trade agreements might soon be a kind of obstacle for Swiss companies, because this is always strictly bilateral, which means that the value chains organization is restricted by the elements of these bilateral free trade agreements, and we are far away from finding a multilateral solution. So another important message from my side is we have to work on the multilateralization. So what Asia is doing successfully right now in this competitive process, we are kind of missing out. We have to become member of these early multilateralization processes. And if you check my latest articles on the topic, you will find that I strongly suggest that Switzerland should join CPTPP, because that's an open agreement. RCEP is a regional agreement, but CPTPP is an open, kind of globally oriented agreement. Really should join there and be a member from early on of this beginning multilateralization process. And we should not look only at the tariffs, but this is about rules for the global economy. And if you follow the presentations when CPTPP went public, then it was quite interesting that both in Washington and in Tokyo, they did not talk about tariffs. They talked about the rules. So who writes the rules for the global economy? This is all about. And that's why I think Switzerland should have a proactive role in this process. We have been very good in this. We have a lot of experience, especially in the context of the WTO. But now this is the next generation of multilateral rules that is going to come into existence, and its epicenter is in Asia. So that's why I think it's really high time. It's kind of late already. We should join these initiatives, and we should try to influence these initiatives. Switzerland has an excellent competence in international trade rules, so we should be part of this process. That was my short presentation. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and maybe my last message again, the world is changing very, very fast, and we do not really feel it here in the center of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me kindly thank you, Professor Ziltener, for this very interesting presentation on the RCEP, which sheds some light not only on the complexities of these regional free trade zones, but also on the interconnection with the CPTPP. Secondly, I want to again thank all the panelists for their contribution to the RCEP session and their time. As Professor Ziltener mentioned, the RCEP really is of global scope. It covers 30% of the global GDP. We heard that. It covers 30% around of the world's population. And thus it has, from an economic and a political perspective, a great importance, not only for the region, but also for the world, including Switzerland. And today we are here with distinguished economic experts, free trade experts, so we would like to focus on economic aspects. Now, the RCEP's main goal are, broadly speaking, and they deviate a little bit from what you see on the screen behind, from the Malaysian Ministry of Industry and Trade. Generally speaking, it's about lowering the tariffs, it's about accelerating cross-border investments, to ensure better protection for intellectual property rights, but also to equal standards, all in all, to write the rules of maybe a new economy, as Professor Ziltener just said. Now, in the coming 30 minutes, we'll have a chance to get a deeper insights from the panelists, not only to get to know their general perception of the RCEP, but also to get a little bit their view on the impact of the RCEP on Switzerland, as well as other interesting factors. As Dennis mentioned, after the discussion round here, we will have a Q&A session, and we cordially invite the audience to ask questions and to involve in that very interesting discourse. With that, I would like to come to our first question, which goes to all panelists, and I would like to start that one then with Rajiv. But let me first give a little background. Recently, Deborah Elms, you may know her, she's an executive director at the Asian Trade Center in Singapore, stated in in a commentary of hers published on CNN that Asian countries will find a new economic stimulus coming from being part of the world's largest free trade agreement, being RCEP. Now, in short brief, Rajiv, first to you and then to the other panelists, what is generally speaking, your view concerning the impact of the RCEP on Switzerland? Is it positive? Is it negative?
Thank you very much for inviting me to join this session today. And I wish I could be in person, but given the situation, it's still a bit difficult. But I want to make a couple of comments about how this is important for Switzerland. And I think let me start with the issue of the rules of origin, because one of the most important advantages of the RCEP is that it creates very favorable rules of origin treatment and provides cumulative benefits that will help companies to build manufacturing supply chains within the RCEP region across different countries. And this, of course, also applies to Swiss firms, such as manufacturing firms from Switzerland, which have operations in the RCEP region. And I think the benefit of RCEP, which flows to RCEP companies, also would be accessible for Swiss companies to create supply chains within the RCEP region and take advantage of these reduced tariff barriers, and also the ability to have cumulative supply chains within the RCEP countries to manufacture products. So I think that's one important benefit for Swiss companies. And again, in a similar way, the RCEP agreement also does move forward in terms of financial services for cross-border market access for the RCEP members in financial services. So I think that's another area where Swiss financial firms, and of course there's already many Swiss financial firms based in Singapore and also in other locations amongst the RCEP members. And so I think Swiss financial firms will also stand to benefit from this RCEP agreement in terms of cross-border market access. Now, all of this is going to take time. I think this is, as Professor Ziltener has mentioned, it's not a big bang. It's going to take some time, but nevertheless, I think this will be beneficial in many ways for Swiss firms.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. So we heard it's making the handling of the supply chains easier. It has positive impact on the financial industry. Patrick Dümmler, what is your view concerning impact?
Well, I basically agree what has been said, although I would like to make a differentiation between probably larger Swiss companies who already have subsidiaries in the RCEP region and those like especially SMEs who probably have only production site here in Switzerland. I believe for the last, it really increases the pressure to be really competitive, probably not so much on the price but on innovation, as for most SMEs or Swiss SMEs, to be really at the innovative, competitive edge in order to compensate probably for higher prices, for higher tariffs and the like you have to pay if you only produce here in Switzerland, have the export components, for example, into a value chain which is mainly based in our RCEP region.
Right, so I take from there it's actually it's a benefit for the big companies, but it's a challenge to the smaller companies, and they need to be more innovative. Michael Settelen, do you share this view?
I do share this view, and probably we can actually move it still a bit further to the fact what Professor Ziltener mentioned, that in terms of trade liberalization, basically between China and Japan and between Japan and Korea, there has been new trade liberalization. The rest of the countries, they've had trade agreements before, and these are the countries, Japan, China and Korea, that make, I don't know, 80% probably of the GDP within RCEP countries, and also are in the higher end of the value chain, and this is also where it's more difficult than for Switzerland, exporting from Switzerland into RCEP, and there comes probably the risk or the challenge of an erosion of competitiveness. And if we look at the trade data, Switzerland with these RCEP countries, I think it's roughly 15% of our trade with the region, and roughly half of that is with China. So China is a very big chunk of that, and if now, say, a Korean or a Japanese competitor of a Swiss producer has a substantial reduction in tariffs into China, then this could be an erosion of competitiveness. In terms of investments, yes, I think roughly 8% of Swiss investments, Swiss OFDI, are within the RCEP region. And yes, for those, this is obviously a facilitation. Once all of these liberalizations are in place and have been implemented and are working and are being utilized by the companies, which is not always the case. So yes, eventually, I think the Peterson Institute of International Economics, they made, I think in February or April, they made a preliminary study on the effects, and they also judged for the EU companies, which has a different industrial structure, obviously, but the bottom line is still that it's positive, it's net positive for their companies. So yeah, I think for Switzerland, it depends very strongly in what industries. Rajiv said the financial sector might benefit, and this is obviously a good point. But for the others, probably the MEM sector, it might be more challenging.
Right, thanks a lot. So again brings challenges, but you said net positive. Patrick Ziltener, when you hear that, can you give a statement following your presentation concerning impact?
Yeah, I think I would like to stress, I've mentioned it in my presentation already, but I would like maybe to clarify it a little bit more, why being part of this multilateralization process is so important for Switzerland. Because if we look at our bilateral FTA network, we might say we are in a good position, and that's correct, that's right. But the world is changing. I would like to make two examples to explain why we cannot stay there, because this is not the solution to all our problems. We can say we have a free trade agreement with Japan, for example. I have been personally involved in that when I worked in the State Secretariat of Economic Affairs. So that was a great success, the first European country having a free trade agreement with Japan. But now the EU has also concluded a free trade agreement with Japan. So we say situation is even. No, it's not, because the EU is an integrated area. That means I don't know how many member states there will be in the future, but let's say 26. There are 26 countries member of this institution. That means a company in the EU can organize its value chain in this area, in this economic area, and this all counts as EU, made in the EU. Switzerland can only do this in Switzerland. So you see, this is while it's interesting to have bilateral free trade agreements, but this is not really a good competitive situation compared to EU companies. And the same is going to happen with RCEP now. That means a Japanese competitor of a Swiss company can operate in this area much easier than Switzerland based on its bilateral free trade agreement with not all, but most of these RCEP countries. That's why I say it looks very successful, our bilateral free trade agreements network, but we should not stay there. The world is changing faster and at different levels, and we have not adapted, we do not react to this challenge yet.
Thanks a lot. I think that's a perfect teaser to our next question. So you mentioned already that Switzerland has entered into numerous bilateral and sometimes multilateral free trade agreements, I think currently around 33 or so. And among them are FTAs with RCEP countries such as Japan, India, South Korea, recently I think Indonesia and the Philippines. Now, Switzerland has not yet ratified the RCEP. And is thus confined to this spaghetti bowl approach, as it is sometimes called. Now, Patrick Dümmler, before we take a deep dive into the RCEP, how do you see the RCEP from a Swiss macroeconomic perspective, given Switzerland is not an RCEP country, and in particular with regard to this spaghetti bowl approach?
I think so far our trade policy has been quite successful, and I agree with Professor Ziltener that the current status quo is not something for the future for Switzerland. You mentioned we have over 30 Swiss or free trade agreements that cover around 75 countries, and apart from Singapore, according to our research, there is no other country in the world who has such a dense network of free trade agreements. But you already mentioned the important word, spaghetti bowl. This is exactly a challenge for companies to adapt to these 30+ free trade agreements with different rules and all that. It makes it very complex in the end. And of course, if you have an integrating region like RCEP, it makes it the companies can be more competitive. And if you're outside of that, yes, of course, you face some challenges. And as the multilateral approach currently, well, almost has come to a halt, it is very challenging from a Swiss perspective, according to my opinion, to find its way in the world for our especially export-oriented industry. So we're talking about updating free trade agreements, which is challenging with some countries because some of our free trade agreement partners have a different opinion how to update the free trade trade agreement. It is challenging also from an internal perspective, because some of our trading partners want to include agricultural goods, for example, where Switzerland has a huge problem internally with its agricultural policy. We have some problems in terms of human rights groups who advocate for including that into additional chapters, into updated free trade agreements, and so on and so forth. So I believe currently Switzerland is in a very challenging position to find its way in this new emerging world order, given that currently the multilateral approach is not really working anymore.
Right. That's very interesting, and it also shows that it's not only difficult for Switzerland on a political level, but also for each Swiss company to operate with these free trade agreements. Now, maybe in one of your publications, Rajiv, about the RCEP, you stated that the RCEP will become the building block for future advancing trade liberalization in the Asia-Pacific. However, you also acknowledged that the US has been left out on both the RCEP and, as we heard before, the CPTPP. Likewise was Switzerland. Now, I think you already touched upon that, but let me ask this to clarify a little bit more. What is your recommendation to Swiss companies, actually, with regard to the RCEP? How should they prepare and adapt their strategy, possibly? And do you believe that they can actually, not only the financial sector, but also other sectors can benefit from the RCEP?
I think certainly, as I already mentioned, the RCEP creates a very important platform which Swiss companies can benefit from, but it does need presence in the RCEP member countries. And of course, that already does exist. There's many Swiss large companies operating in the RCEP countries, so they then would have already access to this RCEP agreement. But I think Professor Ziltener mentioned a very important point, just to move slightly away from RCEP for a moment, which is about the CPTPP, which is open for membership from all countries. And we see this because the UK applied to join the CPTPP earlier this year, and the CPTPP member countries accepted the request from the UK to commence negotiations, and so now the UK is actively negotiating to join the CPTPP. So it certainly would be possible, I think, for Switzerland to also follow a similar path. And the advantage of joining the CPTPP is that many of the CPTPP members are also members of RCEP. So it does then also create quite a strong platform to operate within the RCEP regional framework. So I think there's a huge number of opportunities, both directly for Swiss firms to operate within the RCEP region. As I say, Singapore is a very good platform for financial firms, but then, so is Japan, and of course Swiss firms are also in China. So I think on the financial services side, there's many different hubs, and even more so on the manufacturing side. I think it's a very good point made earlier that smaller Swiss firms may not have that presence. So one challenge will be for the small to medium-sized Swiss companies to establish their presence to benefit from this. And why is it so important is that when we look at the future growth of this RCEP grouping of countries, the current GDP of the RCEP members, as was mentioned earlier, is about $30 trillion US, which is about 32% of world GDP. If we go forward to 2030, that's forecast to increase to about 52 trillion US dollars. So tremendous increase in size of RCEP. And a lot of that will be because of China, but also because the ASEAN region will be growing. So the market size is increasing tremendously. And to put that in perspective, the EU will be about 25 trillion US dollars by 2030. So this RCEP grouping is actually a very huge grouping because, of course, it includes China, which is at the moment the world's second biggest economy, and it also includes Japan. So that, of course, catapults this grouping to a very important status compared to other groupings such as the EU or the US, Mexico, Canada free trade agreement.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. I think your point exactly is aligned with what Professor Ziltener said when he said we should actually look out for alternatives and not only concentrate on what we have, an old continent, Europe, for example, but look for alternatives. Two experts in a recent article published in the Diplomat, they argued that the businesses shall not assume that the changes and the harmonization and simplifications from the RCEP mean that their analytical work will be less necessary. Rather, the challenges and opportunities with the RCEP may increase, as we have already heard, and may increase in particular the time they need to properly assess where to go. Now, Michael, we have talked now quite a lot about the impact, but when do you expect the first impact to really be seen here on the Swiss ground?
On the Swiss ground? I think the impact, as Professor Ziltener alluded to in his presentation, in general, I mean, there's tariff reductions, but these time spans are up to 20 years. And so for Switzerland, I don't think there is, in tariff front anyway, there's no impact. But we also have some reductions and improvements in terms of non-tariff barriers. And you, Patrick Dümmler, you discussed the spaghetti bowl effect and the idea that with RCEP everything is going to be a bit more harmonized, a bit more easier. On the tariff front, this is probably not going to be the case because there is, I think, you correct me, 38 different lists of tariffs that companies will have to analyze and see, okay, in my product line, in year 7, in that country, what does it mean? It's not that easy. So it actually complicates it even further. Also in the trade and services area, I don't think there's so much easier harmonization. There's also a lot of exceptions that every country can have. So short-term impact, I think, is very limited. I think probably the biggest impact will be between the 3 countries that we mentioned, China, Korea, and Japan. And the rule of origin, which applies as of the very beginning, so January 1st. And there I probably would like to also emphasize probably the Chinese angle. And I mean, you want to talk about the economic aspect, I'm aware, but now we're still in this COVID pandemic. A lot of people are talking about decoupling, which has been accelerated. A lot of people say that has been accelerated. And we talked about exporting vis-a-vis investing within the region, and I think there will be a shift and more pressure towards investing in the region into supply chains and value chains, also because of geopolitical transformations that we're seeing. China will focus very strongly on the region. They're talking about a gravitational field of a market, and I mean, for them it's good that they have their higher value-added processes within China and shift parts of them lower value-added processes towards Southeast Asia, for instance. So if Swiss companies want to be there, they should further localize as well. Of course, for SMEs, this is challenging, and there the Swiss trade policy needs to find solutions. I think this week, just a couple of days ago, SECO published a new foreign economic policy strategy. And they also recognize this fact that there's new rules being set, and this is a huge challenge. So, long story short, I think short term the rules of origin, this will be a change, but I think on a tariff and the other things, when it comes to implementation, a lot of things are still unclear. We've seen it with the China agreement, for instance, the utilization rate, so the rate where tariffs under the agreement are actually being used by companies are roughly 50%. And it is because, customs officers probably didn't know how to do it. It has all been more complicated for companies to try to use the agreement rather than simply pay the tariffs and have no hassle about that. So this is also something to, I think, bear in mind.
Right, so I hear that we still have some time, so Patrick Ziltener, can we relax? Is everything okay? You said there is some urgency. What is your reaction?
Yes, I think that's indeed my main message. If we look at our bilateral free trade agreement network, then we would say everything's fine. Second after Singapore, you said. I think we are really in the top level, top league with this. But the world is changing faster, and we need to find new answers. From my research, we did many interviews with Swiss companies also, and it's always important to understand that free trade agreement, or free trade in general, does not mean there are no obstacles anymore. It's like the gates are open, no restrictions. That's not true. There are a lot of conditions that have to be met. Companies have to do their paperwork. In some cases, they have to prove that they comply with the rules of origin. And if they don't, in some cases, they do not even have to pay the tariffs, but there can be even a fine if you're not able to produce this documentary. So it's a kind of risk. And some companies, indeed, they say, should we use it or not? Do I have to reorganize my value chains in order to use the free trade agreement? So the world is much more difficult than it looks. If we look at the network of free trade agreements, we think we're in the perfect position. But the reality is different, and that's why I stress that Switzerland has to be more proactive and to be engaged in this process of multilateralization. Otherwise, we will have a deteriorating position in the future.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think we'd now like to take a little bit a deeper look into the RCEP. According, and I think cross-border investments have already been mentioned by Rajiv, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the RCEP is highly relevant for cross-border investment. Now, if you look at the RCEP, a provision provides that, however, the benefits under the RCEP may be denied to investors owned or controlled by persons from non-RCEP countries. So therefore the question arises, Patrick Dümmler, will Swiss companies need to rely on old free trade agreements with RCEP countries, bilateral, multilateral free trade agreements, instead of the RCEP, utilizing the RCEP, if they have a presence in one of the RCEP country and want to invest in another RCEP country? And what does that mean in terms of boosting kind of foreign direct investment in the RCEP area?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, of course, Swiss companies might benefit from RCEP if investing in the RCEP area, because it might ease things, some of the things. Of course, I'm not really the expert on the details of the RCEP agreement, but still I believe this could be an opportunity for Swiss companies. But again, I believe for those companies who do not have the capital to go abroad to invest there, to establish manufacturing sites, they still rely on the attractiveness of Switzerland as a R&D and production site. And this is what I sometimes now miss from our political leaders here in Switzerland, not so much from the administration, but from our political leaders, that they don't really developed a vision how to further foster Switzerland as a R&D and production site. We have some problems with the European Union. As you know, the framework agreement has been terminated by our political leaders. We do not have a free trade agreement with the United States. In 2006, Switzerland, according to my knowledge, as the only country in the world, really slammed the door to the US, basically saying, well, we do not want to negotiate on a free trade agreement with you because of our agricultural sector. This happened already the second time a few years back. So currently, I believe Switzerland is in a very difficult position with an aging portfolio of free trade agreements where, as I already said, it's difficult to update them for various reasons. And again, the unsolved relation or further development of the relation with the European Union. So we have to develop a vision where we stand as a location, as a business location, where we stand in geopolitical issues, in international trade as Switzerland. So this is still missing.
Right. Thank you very much. I think maybe a question to Patrick Ziltener, and maybe going back to the title of this session, how Asian is the Asian mega trade agreement. We just heard that there are ways to look out non-RCEP country investors. Patrick, what is your view in this regard?
What I wanted to highlight in my presentation is that RCEP is at the same time also the result of economic integration that has taken place over the last 20, 30 years already. So that's the interesting thing. That's also the reason why it's not a big bang, because it's rather the result now and the formalization of existing relations already, the single rule book that makes a huge difference. I agree with that. And they are able to do that. We are not. In the West, we are not. We are not able to come up with single rule books. We are not able to further develop our multilateral institutions that have been so successful for decades. But in Asia, it's going on. And that's a kind of maybe not that visible yet, but this is a kind of tectonic shift again. And that's not the only area. We could talk about other things. For example, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And maybe to put it also in a little broader context, one of the amazing things is that these countries are able to deepen trade and economic integration at the same time. They have a lot of security policy and foreign affairs problems. For example, Australia and China are kind of on a confrontational course, but at the same time they're able to develop their trade initiatives. So that's really quite amazing, and I think it's new, and it's coming from Western Europe. It's a kind of unthinkable, because economic integration and the regional peace structure is intertwined in Europe, but it's not in Asia. So this is really something new that we should also see from a broader perspective.
Thank you very much. I think that's a good teaser to our next question that I would like to address to Rajiv and then Michael. You said it's new is tied to a younger generation. This conference has been organized by the Generation A, so the young generation of Asia interested people. Now, the current century, let me put it that way, the current century has been described as a time of struggle for US supremacy. Now, the RCEP has been created in that time without the US involvement. It seems that from a free trade perspective, both the CPTPP and the RCEP have therefore ushered a new way or a new area. Now, I know that you have been very passionate about the young generation, Rajiv. Therefore, I would like to know your perspective, how the RCEP will affect or impact the younger generation, and how it will actually shape their understanding of the regional and or global free trade arrangements and collaborations.
Thanks. That's a very important topic, of course, as to, you know, how will it affect the generation now, you know, looking to the future, and who will be, you know, in the next 20 years taking more and more senior roles in Swiss industry and Swiss financial firms. You know, how does that link in with the Asia Pacific? And I think the point perhaps I want to make here, we already talked about RCEP, and we also talked about CPTPP, and we talked about them as somewhat different, or, you know, and they are different trade deals. But I also want to highlight another development, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation grouping of economies also has been pushing the concept of a vision for an Asia-Pacific free trade area. And this is something that China was quite strongly behind. And the idea of this started in 2010 to create, you know, a cross-Pacific kind of economic grouping. And the plans for this so-called FTAAP, to add to our spaghetti bowl today, is that APEC leaders did set out a plan for such a comprehensive free trade agreement. And therefore, the RCEP and CPTPP could be building blocks for a vision for this vast free trade area that cuts across the whole Pacific region. And that would also then include North America. And we do have in the CPTPP Canada and Mexico already. And then also amongst the APEC members is Russia and also some Latin American nations. So if these two big trade agreements that are currently in existence do eventually coalesce, you can see the tremendous opportunities that will arise for Switzerland to be engaged with that huge trade grouping. But even if we don't go quite as far as that, it might take a long time. I certainly think that both CPTPP, but possibly with Switzerland becoming even a member, and then also RCEP with Switzerland, at least, you know, engaging by having platforms within RCEP, that does create tremendous growth opportunity. I already mentioned that our forecasts are that the size of RCEP will increase from $30 trillion now, which is already pretty huge, to 52 trillion approximately by 2030, and of course rising further beyond that. So for Switzerland and for Swiss young professionals, it clearly shows that this Asia-Pacific region is going to create tremendous revenue opportunities for Swiss firms across a wide spectrum of areas. Of course, for the big multinationals like financial services firms or the large manufacturing firms, it does create, you know, opportunities, and they're well geared up to operate in the region and already are operating. But I think what's also very interesting is what about the small firms and, you know, entrepreneurs who want to start their own businesses, you know, from wide range of different sectors. It could create huge opportunities to engage with the region. So I think when we look to the future over the next 10 years and certainly 20 years, I think it creates tremendous growth opportunities, both for big companies from Switzerland, but also for the small entrepreneurs as well who want to tap into that huge market.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. So you have hope that it can actually extend, the RCEP can become global. Michael, what is your view on that? Can you present your perspective also in terms of benefits for the younger generation? How should we as a younger generation actually treat this idea of RCEP and global trade liberalization.
Thank you. One thing, I probably don't agree with Rajiv on the optimism or the optimistic outlook on these, spaghetti bowl regionals to coalesce in the near future. CPTPP was basically the idea, TPP with the US. The US then themselves decided to not join. With RCEP, we have basically something very interesting, I think, is that has not been mentioned here yet, that in the agreement there is a secretariat. So I think this is the ASEAN way, and Rajiv, you correct me, you're there on the ground, to start modest and keep moving forward, keep integrating on a better, faster and slower pace. But what we're seeing, or what analysts on the ground are also seeing, is that when it comes to e-commerce, there are things going forward. When it comes to more modern trade, rules and regulations, things are about to move forward. And as I mentioned before, I think China has a huge interest in driving these things forward, and the US now has by themselves decided not to be part of it. So the rules and regulations and standards of this particular region are going to be decided in this particular region. WTO is still not moving forward, or hopefully next week we'll see something more optimistic. So I think for the young generation, this means the rules of the game, at least in this region, are going to be written there. Probably they're going to have an impact also on the global rules book. We're going to see how this is going to turn out. We don't know that yet. As regards to young people on the ground, the agreement, I think, also has facilitation as regards to recognition of education or professional qualifications. So the moving from one country into another is also easier. And I think one further important aspect is the development of these regions. They're also for Switzerland. A lot of countries in the region are focus countries for the DEZA, for our development agency. Yeah, I think for the future generations, we're always talking about sustainable development there. So this is something that is going to come, and yeah, we'll see what the topics will be, but climate change most likely will be one of them.
Right, thank you very much. I think when we think about Asia, we also think about India, and India has actually been mentioned by Mr. Nabholz in his introductory speech. But when we look at the chart above, we don't see India. India is not part of the RCEP. Now, what does that mean, Patrick Ziltener?
That would be probably best if somebody from India, an Indian entrepreneur, would answer that. Of course, I have followed the discussion, and for me it was quite interesting that India stayed on this RCEP train for quite a while, because we knew already from the beginning there will be structural obstacles, and especially if you take into account that India has a democratic process at home. So it's very difficult to create the legitimacy for something like that. And the idea is not popular in the Indian public, of course. So even if they would have signed it, I would doubt that they would really ratify it. I think there are really big obstacles. At the same time, I'm not a specialist on India's economy, but at the same time, it's quite clear that there's no other way for India to start to implement reforms that will eventually lead to an economic integration of that kind. And I don't see that going on very fast. So I don't expect a rejoining of India to RCEP very soon.
Right. Maybe, Rajiv, before we open the floor or the question round where the audience can participate, quickly, your view concerning India.
Yeah, I think that's, I agree with Professor Ziltener that it was a very difficult path. I think India wanted to be part of it at a government level. So they tried to go as far forward as possible. But it became clear that there was a lot of opposition, not only just from grassroots, the public, but also many companies were opposed to it. because they felt that their franchises within India would come under a lot of competitive pressure. So for now, I think politically there's too many stakeholders within India who are opposed to it to make it politically possible. On the RCEP side, all the RCEP existing 15 members have said, and it's written in their agreement, that India can again join if it wishes to. But I don't envisage that's going to be possible for India to do in the foreseeable future. So I don't see the possibility that India could join, at least in the next, say, decade or so. If it eventually were to join, of course, it would further expand the size of the RCEP. And the RCEP is open for other countries to join as well. India had the right to join when it chose, but other countries will be eligible to join RCEP after 18 months from implementation. And the start date will be the 1st of January 2022. So from 18 months from then, other countries will be also allowed to apply to join. And I would expect that there will be countries coming forward to join up with the RCEP.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. I think it's an interesting discussion. We have learned a lot. We have learned that there will be challenges, there will be opportunities, maybe not in the short term, but definitely in the longer term. We have also learned that obviously it's not only an economic question, but it's also a political matter. Now I would like to ask Adam to the stage and to ask the audience here to please bring forward your questions. You are cordially invited to engage with our panelists here, and would like to hand over now to Adam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that there are hybrid cars being shifted between Europe and Asia. This event is also hybrid. So we have the opportunity you have the opportunity to ask the questions on Slido. The code is GENA. You can also do it from the room, but you can also use the microphone. Just raise your hand. Everybody else online, please log into slido.com, where you can ask the questions. While people online are typing their questions, is there some burning question in the room? Please.
Adrian Keller. I just would like to make a comment and then ask a question. The comment is, at the current, with Asia Society, the negotiator for the TPP was Wendy Cutler, and that conversation is being opened again. Not sure that the CPTPP wants America at this point, but that conversation is open, and my point or my question is, China has submitted its application to that organization, but apparently also Taiwan will submit an application. What would that change in the size? I think let's take the Taiwan question out. It's too complicated. But what would that change in the nature of it, and how would that affect the importance of RCEP?
Who would like to take this question, Professor?
Yes. I mentioned the character of this process. I called it competitive. So this is about competitive rule setting. And of course, now China wanting to join CPTPP, that's now the moment of truth, right? So first of all, can China comply with the CPTPP rules? They say they can. Chinese say if Singapore with all its state-owned enterprises can join CPTPP, then we can do that too. So what's the difference between the rules? So of course, there could be a lengthy analysis. I just want to just mention some points. The rules about the state-owned enterprises is a difference. Then the environmental regulation is different. Labor rights is quite extended in CPTPP, especially in the original version. And then there are also regulations on transparency and anti-corruption. So this will be the moments of contestation. So will China change these rules? Will they accept? Will they implement these rules? And CPTPP also has a lot of conditions how these things are going to be monitored. So that will be the conflict. And I have I'm not certain how this will end, but that's the interesting thing to follow.
thank you for the presentations. Should we think about RCEP like a reduced scope of the European Union? So just the trade part, without the currency, without the politics and so on. And if we look back at history, if we look at the amount of trade into the EU before the establishment of the EU to after the establishment, how much has trade into the region actually gone up? Or have most of the economic benefits actually gone to the EU members? The second question is for Patrick Ziltener. Great to see you again, Patrick. You made a very good argument as to why Switzerland should apply to be part of the CPTPP. I imagine it has been on the agenda of the Swiss leadership. At least I hope so. What were the major points they had against it?
Shall we start maybe with the first question? Rajiv?
Yeah, I think when we look at the EU and compare it with RCEP or CPTPP, I think this debate has been going on in Asia for a long time, especially within ASEAN, the regional grouping of Southeast Asia. You know, is ASEAN going to be comparable to the EU? And I think in general, the sense is not. This is a very different kind of agreement, because what you have in the EU, I think, is, you know, obviously it's moved very much towards political union and all kinds of other things like free movement of people, obviously the establishment of a common currency. All of those things, I think, are very, very hard to envisage for Southeast Asia, let alone the broader RCEP grouping. So I don't see that there's a comparison. I think it's very much a trade agreement, and that's as far as it will, and investment flows as well. So in those areas, I think we'll see some progress, and, you know, it'll be important. For example, just to give you a sense of how important the lowering of tariffs has already been, even before the RCEP's been implemented. When we look at China and ASEAN trade, if we go back to 1990, China-ASEAN trade was very, very low indeed. Ever since then, it's been growing at about 16% per year. And now we've reached the point where in 2020, ASEAN became China's biggest trade partner. So it's such a dramatic change in the situation that's come about through, obviously, the growth of China, the growth of ASEAN, but also I think the lowering of tariff barriers has been important. So I think with that, we can see that there have been tremendous benefits that have come and will continue to accrue, but I don't see it moving in the direction of anything like the EU. I think that template, I don't think is going to be relevant in the case of the Asia Pacific in the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much. Maybe the second question, argument of Swiss leadership against CPTPP.
If we look at the rules and the ambition level of the rules in CPTPP, I think that's not really a problem for Switzerland. Switzerland already has, for example, a high level of protection of intellectual property. All these kind of things are in the interest of Switzerland, most of these rules. We have no problem with the environmental chapter, with the labor rights chapter, and with the others. But of course, when joining CPTPP means you have to also negotiate bilaterally with each member state. That means we have to negotiate with the Australians and with the New Zealanders about agriculture. They will be tough, and I understand that in Bern this idea is not really pleasant. This would be very, very hard and tough negotiations. But I think there's no alternative anyway, because with all coming free trade partners of Switzerland, we are going to have this discussion. And I expect from Switzerland that we have the institutional innovative spirit. Patrick Dümmler, you also asked for that, the innovative spirit to deal with these questions. So we can do it, and we would be in an excellent position to further write the one day global rules of trade. I think that's just our calling.
And just one add-on. I think the foreign economic strategy that I mentioned a bit earlier mentions or actually says that RCEP and CPTPP will be considered. And the rest is you.
Thank you very much. We have less than 2 minutes remaining, so we have time for one more question.
Thank you. I'll try and be as quick as possible. A point that Rajiv touched on in one of his earlier remarks was the potential for non-regional states to gain accession to the RCEP being in the pipeline. Even if that does come to pass, in your view, in an open question to all of you, if all of you want to answer, if only one or two of you do, will Asia remain? Will it always be the big winner, no matter who gains accession? And secondly, as somebody who's not Swiss, it may not be as apparent to me as it might be to most others in the room, but from the Swiss perspective, what is the hesitancy on moving forward with more liberalized trade with the United States, the European Union, and the Asian region? Are there any specific overlapping areas, or is it solely a prevailing sense of protectionism on the part of the Swiss government?
Maybe first with your question, if I understood correctly, how is Asia the real winner, and will Asia remain to be the real winner? Patrick Dümmler.
I'd probably rather go for the second question, if I may.
Okay, then I'll give it a shot. I think in the beginning it is more trade in Asia for Asia, but as Rajiv I think rightly stated, within 18 months upon entering into force, it is open to also Switzerland or other players. But given the caveats that Professor Ziltener mentioned, with no rules on SOEs, on subsidies, competition policies, environment, labor not being included, I think for Switzerland this would not be realistic. Neither will it be for the EU or any countries having these high standards. So probably it will remain rather regional. But this is a guess.
Second question. Do we protect our own economy, bearing in mind we don't have a foreign direct investment approval process like other countries? What is your view?
Actually, I believe apart from agricultural policy, we are a pretty much open economy, especially when you think about the recent parliament decision to abolish all import tariffs, which also favors, of course, the export-oriented industry because it makes it cheaper for them to source components from abroad. So again, apart from agriculture, we are open. The problem is really what also Professor Ziltener mentioned, is our agricultural policy. There I don't see the political will to really open up. But this is one of the main conditions for a lot of countries. You mentioned the US, for the US, but also for some Mercosur states. Australia has been mentioned, New Zealand, and so on. They would never enter negotiations with Switzerland if Switzerland would already from the very beginning exclude all agricultural goods.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached 1 hour. There are so many questions I would like to ask also personally, but unfortunately it's not possible. We can do it during the breaks or after the third session. I would like to thank you, our panelists. I will give you some small goodies. Rajiv, as far as I'm aware, there is something on its way to Singapore as well. So we have something to look forward to. Thank you very much for your time, attention, and see you next time at another RCEP topic.